Hi, this week, especially as we in the United Methodist Church attempt to process through our most recent General Conference, I want to talk about the way in which we can be lured into using Christian things to kind of try to get us off the hook of actually living as Christians. As of the date of this recording, I have just started doing my yearly rereading of Kierkegaard's Attack on Christendom. And I did a review and a kind of recommendation about this a while back. And if everything works right with YouTube, there should be a link appearing right there that you can click on if you want to go see it. But in any case, one of the things I really like about Kierkegaard is the way he cuts through all the garbage and kind of lays out the ways that we quietly substitute playing Christian for being Christians. In particular, in kind of his opening shot that riled up the established church, he wrote, "Truly, there is that which is more contrary to Christianity, and to the very nature of Christianity, than any heresy, any schism, more contrary than all the heresies and all schisms combined, and that is to play Christianity." But precisely in the same sense that a child plays soldier, it's playing Christianity to take away the danger. And in the place of this, to introduce power, worldly goods, advantages, luxurious enjoyments of the most exquisite refinements. So I want to take a look at the kinds of things he talks about and about how the playing of Christianity distracts us from really living as Christians. I do want to make it clear that even though Kierkegaard does a great job of reminding me about this kind of topic, it really is Jesus who said it at the root of the issue. In the midst of his woes to the Pharisees in Matthew chapter 23, he writes, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you tithe mint and dill and cumin, and have neglected the weightier provisions of the law, justice and mercy and faithfulness. But these are the things you should have done without neglecting the others. You blind guides, who strain out a gnat and swallow a camel." In the church, the Pharisees are pretty much the worst people you can imagine, and you will often hear people compared to the Pharisees when they really want to get them where it hurts. Now, you'll hear people say different things about what was really the cause of the problems of the Pharisees. You'll hear some people talk about that the Pharisees were too legalistic, which means they took the law of the Old Testament too seriously. But if we look carefully at what Jesus says, we don't find Jesus actually saying that. We see, like in this woe that he speaks, that the problem is not that they took the law too seriously, but they kind of picked and chose the things they liked, the things that were relatively easy for them, and they used them as a way to kind of get off the hook of having to do the other things the law talked about. The problem isn't the rules as such. The problem is picking the rules you like without paying attention to the bigger issues like justice and mercy and faithfulness. I mean, remember that Jesus doesn't tell them that they shouldn't be tithing their herb gardens. In fact, he says, you should be doing those things, just don't leave the big things undone because of it. You'll also hear people say that the big problem of the Pharisees is that they excluded people based on what the law said. But again, if we look at what Jesus says, we find that he really doesn't say that. The bigger problem that he really goes to town on the Pharisees about has to do with the fact that the things they're using to exclude people is not even the law. They're not paying attention enough to the law to realize that what they're using to exclude people is actually the traditions that they and the elders have actually made up. Now, I don't want to say that those other things don't have any role to play as far as being, what we should or shouldn't do. But what I'm saying is that if we look at the kinds of things Jesus actually says about the Pharisees, and especially in these 8 woes to the Pharisees in Matthew 23, we find that the big problem seems to be that the Pharisees were taking part of what it means to be the people of God, or at least part of what they think it means to be the people of God, and use it as a way to substitute in place of actually having to live day in and day out actually as the people of God. So I would like to get into some specifics, but again, I have to be clear because this can often come off the wrong way. I'm not trying to say that anybody who seems to be doing some of the things that I'm going to mention are necessarily doing it as a way to kind of get off the hook. What I'm saying is it seems that there are some people in the world who do this kind of thing, and I think that even if I'm being honest with myself, I kind of lean at that direction more than I would like to. And so it's a matter of bringing things up for consideration, not saying that everybody is guilty of all these same things, but to be aware of how this might be affecting each of us in our own lives. So let me start with a fictional example. Now, I really didn't ever watch the show The Sopranos, but I did catch part of one episode at one point, and in that particular episode, that part that I saw, the main character, who was a mafia boss, was trying to console his daughter, and in the midst of doing so, he said essentially words to the effect of, well, what did you expect if you're living in sin with your boyfriend? And I couldn't hardly contain myself at how ridiculous that statement was. But the thing is, here's a guy who's using a particular form of outward manifestations, outward trappings of what it might be to be a faithful Roman Catholic, and is using it, it seems, as a way to get himself off the hook of actually having to live like a Christian. Because if he really took the central core of Christian faith seriously, the thing he's paying lip service to when talking about living in sin with her boyfriend, he would have to then stop killing people. He'd have to stop being organized in a way that is causing destruction to many people. Now, I realize he's a fictional character, but I think that those kinds of examples can help us to get our minds working without taking things too personally or too offensively. There are people in the world who go to church, but they do so very infrequently, perhaps just Christmas and Easter, if even that. And maybe they'll wear a gold cross necklace around. And the thing is, for some people, I mean, there's lots of people who wear cross necklaces and it's totally appropriate, but there are some people for whom the wearing of the cross necklace is a way they can convince themselves they're still Christians, in spite of the fact that very little in their life actually goes to support that aside from wearing a piece of jewelry. I once served in a church, and we got a letter from somebody saying they wanted to join the church. And to my knowledge, they never actually physically attended. But the reason why they sent a letter saying they wanted to join the church was because when the time came and they announced their candidacy for a public office, they wanted to be able to say that they were a member of that particular church. And so it seemed as though it was very important that they be seen as somebody who goes to church, seen as somebody with some kind of robust Christian faith. And it was more important for them to be seen that way than to actually live that way. I've seen a lot of people, and I suppose that you have too, spend a lot of time and a lot of effort working to get certain laws passed or certain laws prevented from being passed, and working on a big way to be a cultural influencer to bring about some kind of national societal change that will hopefully, they would say, make us more in line with what the gospel has to say. And I suspect that there's at least some folks who are in the midst of all that and doing all those things and playing the political game because for them, that's easier, that's more enjoyable, that's more invigorating than the hard work of really living day in and day out as a disciple of Christ. As a pastor in a large and diverse denomination, at least today, I hear a lot of my colleagues, I hear a lot of people around our connection really working very hard, putting a lot of effort, a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of money into one thing or another on the global scale, trying to get the denomination to either change a position or to reaffirm a position that they believe is the more faithful alternative. But one of the questions that I often have, and not being God, I really can't speak in any specific case, but the unease I have is I worry whether we may not be spending as much or more time working on these big, sweeping, general statements and positions and official capacities that we don't necessarily spend the same amount of effort and time and focus on our own faithfulness and our own living in our own communities, really doing the work of the gospel. Again, I'm not trying to call out any person in particular. The fact of the matter is my concerns when I raise these things are really not primarily, believe it or not, directed at anybody else in particular. What that does for me is it reminds me of the kinds of things that perhaps I do without realizing it, that kind of distract me, the things that I would rather do because actually following Jesus is hard work. You know, I don't feel up to doing the real hard work, the real work that doesn't necessarily always have a lot of glory into it. What do I do instead as a way to distract me from the hard work that I need to be doing? I think there are a lot of people in the world who are more interested in looking like a Christian than actually being a Christian. Now, I'm not trying to say that these people would actually say that kind of thing out loud to anybody else. And I'm not even saying that they would allow themselves to admit it, even just to themselves. But I think that that kind of person really does exist. I think there are people who go to seminary and serve as pastors, and perhaps part of the reason why they did that was to finally get everybody off their back asking them if they have living faith, if they really are a disciple of Jesus, if they're following after him every day. Because it would be so much easier to say, well, of course I'm a Christian. I went to seminary. I took the time. I took the money. I went and I did this thing. I'm serving as a pastor. Of course I'm living out a life of faith. And for some people, going through that very long, difficult process may actually be easier, maybe more attractive than the hard work of living without glory day in, day out as a Christian. I want to say that the reason why I think about all these things is not because I'm trying to tear down colleagues or to tear down other Christians. Far from it. The reason why I think about those kinds of things is because of what I read in the Bible. Because the Pharisees, for example, had a huge reputation of being really faithful, really committed. But the fact of the matter is that they kind of tried to outsource the heart-rending, gut-wrenching, hard work of living day by day, trying to be faithful to God and trying to outsource it into a list of rules that they could follow. It removed the anguish. It removed the tension of having to listen and live the way God lives, and to listen every day for perhaps that new word from God. To say, go here today, do this new thing today. And they outsourced it and tried to codify it in a way that then turned to stone and began to bring death rather than life. And even if it isn't in this really big overarching way of kind of hypocrisy, I think that there's a temptation for all of us in big ways or small ways to try to find something else, some kind of proxy that we can substitute in place of living, dynamic, hardworking faith. Something that's going to, at the same time, be more convincing to other people that we're Christians than actually living as Christians, but also something that's going to be easier for us because we still have a certain amount of control of it. It doesn't actually call into question every part of our lives. We can still hold on to being Lord in some areas of our lives. So as we get ready to enter into the season of Lent, I would encourage you to join with me in an attempt to try to dig through our lives and root out those distractions that draw our attention away from actually living the faith that Christ has called us to live. And we may not always be successful at it, but I would hope that you and myself can both work together to draw attention to it in our own lives. So what I'm saying is, maybe as Lent comes up, maybe don't worry so much about some kind of small luxury that you can give up for a month and a half, but to look deep down inside of you and ask yourself the question of, what things do I do to distract myself from the hard work I know God has called me to do? What do I do? How do I approach things in a way that distracts me from the big task at hand? And if we work on that for the season of Lent, we may find ourselves on the other side of it, more committed, more faithful, and more ready to do the hard work of ministry and life as Christians. Well, that's all I have for this week. If you find these videos stimulating or interesting or helpful, consider liking them and sharing them on Facebook. You can also subscribe to the channel these are hosted at, which is YouTube/tstevik1. If you have any questions or any topics you'd like me to take up, please send me an email at pastorstevik@gmail.com. I look forward to hearing from you, and I'll see you next time.